I still remember the smell of bleach and lemon that filled the air every morning. When I walked into the tall glass building downtown, I would tie my hair back, put on my uniform, and start mopping the marble floors before the sun even rose. The hallways were silent, then only the hum of the lights and the rhythm of my steps kept me company. I liked it that way because in those quiet hours, I could think, I could breathe. My name is Linda, and for 30 years I worked as a cleaner in that same building. The world never saw me, but I saw it all. I saw young men rushing to their offices holding coffee cups and dreams. I saw women in shiny heels walking fast with phones pressed to their ears. I saw people come and go, win and lose, rise and fall, while I stayed right there in my blue uniform, polishing floors and cleaning their world. Sometimes people looked at me like I was invisible. Some would nod politely, but most would just walk past me without a glance. There were even days when a few laughed behind my back. They called me names thinking I couldn't hear, but I heard every word: the cleaner, the janitor, the nobody. But I smiled anyway because my father once told me, dignity is not in the job you do, it's in how you do it. And I never forgot that. I started this job after my husband Tom died in a car accident. I was 32 and we had a daughter named Emily. She was just 7 then, and I remember holding her hand at the funeral, wondering how I would ever raise her alone. I had no college degree, no special skills, but I had 2 strong hands and a will that refused to break. So I walked into that building one morning, asked if they were hiring, and when the manager looked me up and down and said, "You sure you want to clean toilets for a living?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm sure." The first years were the hardest. My back ached, my feet burned, and sometimes the smell of chemicals made my head spin. But every time I wanted to quit, I thought about Emily. I thought about her sleeping in her little bed with her school books beside her, and I reminded myself why I was doing it. I wanted her to have more than I ever did. I wanted her to walk in this world with her head high and never feel small. At night, after my shift, I would come home, make us dinner, and sit beside her while she did her homework. She would ask me questions about math and science, and I'd do my best to help. Even when I didn't understand much myself, I used to tell her, "Baby, you're going to go far in this world. You're going to do things I could only dream of." And she would smile, that big toothy smile, and say, "I will, Mom, for both of us." As the years passed, I became part of the building's invisible routine. The executives changed. The companies changed, but I stayed. People stopped noticing me altogether, except one man, Mr. Hayes. He was the night security guard. A quiet old veteran with kind eyes. He would always greet me with a nod. And sometimes we shared coffee in the break room. He told me stories about his time in the army, and I told him about Emily. He said, "You've got something special, Linda. Don't ever let this world make you forget that." When Emily turned 18, she got a scholarship to a good university. I cried the day we packed her bags. I hugged her tight and whispered, "You make me proud." She said, "I already am, because you taught me what strength looks like." For a while, the apartment felt empty without her. I still worked long hours, but I didn't mind. It kept me busy. I'd send her a little money whenever I could, and she'd always say, "Mom, stop sending me your hard-earned money." But I'd laugh and say, "You're my daughter, I'll always take care of you." People at work still didn't see me, not really. Sometimes when I'd walk past the conference rooms, I'd hear laughter and see the young employees sitting around a big table eating and joking, and I'd think to myself, one day they'll learn that life humbles everyone sooner or later. There was one woman, though, a young intern named Rachel. She used to smile at me every morning, and once she asked if I'd like to sit with her for lunch. I was surprised because no one ever asked that before. I said, "You don't want people to see you eating with the cleaner, do you?" She laughed and said, "I don't care what people see." She told me her mother used to clean houses, and that's how she got through college. We became friends in our quiet way. She'd leave me little notes that said things like, "You're doing great," or "You make this place shine." I worked in that building for decades. I saved every dollar I could. I never went on vacations, never bought fancy clothes. Every Christmas, Emily would beg me to spend a little on myself, but I'd say, "No, honey, I'm saving for something important." What she didn't know was that I was saving for her future and for something more. As time went on, my hands grew rough, my hair turned gray, and the same people who used to mock me started calling me ma'am instead of hey janitor. I saw many of them rise to success and then fall hard. Some lost their jobs, some their families. And when they walked past me with their heads down, I never felt joy in their failure. I just wished them peace because I knew what it felt like to struggle. One year the company hosted a big Christmas party and the manager told me I could come if I wanted. I almost said no, but Rachel insisted, so I went wearing my best dress and the same old shoes I'd had for years. People looked surprised to see me there. Some smiled politely. Others whispered things like, wow, she actually showed up, but I didn't care because for the first time in my life, I felt proud. I wasn't ashamed of who I was. At the party, one man asked me, so Linda, how does it feel cleaning up after all of us? I looked him in the eye and said, it feels good to know that every day when you walk into this building and smell the clean floors and see everything in place, that's my work. It means I've done something right. His smile faded and he looked away. And for once I felt powerful. Years passed and I retired quietly at 65. The building gave me a small farewell card and a cake. I didn't expect anything more. I took my mop one last time, walked through those hallways and whispered goodbye to every memory, every step, every scar I left behind. Emily had become a lawyer by then, married with 2 kids. She begged me to move in with her, but I said, no, sweetheart. I like my little house. It's peaceful here. She didn't know that I had built that house slowly over the years, paying for it bit by bit until it was mine. When I got sick a few years later, the doctors told me my time was running short, but I wasn't afraid. I had lived a full life, filled with love and struggle and purpose, and I still had one more thing to do. I called a lawyer and made my will. It took weeks to write because I didn't have much money, but what I did have mattered. My small house, my savings account, my pension, and a few investments I had made quietly over the years. I wanted them to go to Emily and my grandchildren, but I also had another plan, one no one knew about. I decided to leave something for the people in that building too, the ones who never saw me, the ones who mocked me, the ones who forgot that every life deserves respect. When the time came, my lawyer carried out my wishes exactly as I had written. After I passed away, everything unfolded slowly, just the way I wanted it to. I had lived my life quietly, and I wanted my goodbye to carry the same quiet strength that guided me through all those years. My lawyer, Mr. Daniels, was a gentle man with soft eyes and a voice that carried kindness. He told Emily and a few others that I had left behind a detailed will with instructions for a gathering. It was to take place in the very same building where I had worked for 3 decades, the place that had seen my laughter, my pain, my sweat, and my tears. The company agreed when they heard my name, and some of the younger employees were confused because they didn't remember me at all. But the older ones, they fell silent. They remembered Linda the cleaner, the one who always smiled, no matter how tired she looked. On the day of the gathering, Emily walked into that building holding her daughter's hand. The walls looked the same, shiny white floors that still smelled faintly of lemon polish. Her daughter, Sophie, whispered, "Grandma used to clean this big place, Mom." Emily smiled through her tears and said, "Yes, sweetheart." This was her world for a long time. Inside the conference room, where hundreds of meetings had once taken place, a few dozen people sat waiting. Some of them were my old co-workers. Some were the managers who used to give me orders, and some were just there out of curiosity. The air felt heavy with silence as Mr. Daniels stood at the front holding the envelope that contained my final words. He cleared his throat and said, "Thank you all for being here. Linda wanted me to read this letter out loud before we discuss her will." He opened the envelope and unfolded a piece of paper that trembled slightly in his hands. The letter began, "To everyone who is here today. If you are hearing this, then my time in this world has come to an end, and I want you to know that I left with peace in my heart. I spent most of my life cleaning these halls, watching people walk past me like I wasn't there. Some of you smiled at me, and for that I thank you. Some of you mocked me, and for that I forgive you. When you spend enough time cleaning up after others, you start to see the truth about people. You learn that kindness is the rarest thing in the world, and that respect has nothing to do with money or titles. It comes from the heart. I never had much, but I worked hard and saved every penny because I wanted my daughter Emily to have the life I could only dream of. And she did. She became everything I hoped for and more. But I also wanted to leave behind a lesson for those who once laughed at me, the ones who couldn't see the person behind the uniform. So here's what I've done. Mr. Daniels paused and looked around the room. Everyone leaned forward, waiting. He continued reading. I bought a small piece of land 20 years ago, just outside the city. It wasn't worth much back then, but over the years, its value grew. I sold it recently before my passing, and the money from that sale is now in a trust I created for the janitorial and maintenance staff of this building. Every cleaner, every security guard, every person who works hard behind the scenes to keep this place running will now receive an annual bonus paid from that trust fund for as long as the money lasts. I wanted them to know that their work matters, that their lives matter, and that someone saw them. As for those who once mocked me or looked down on me, I left you something too, a memory I hope you will carry for the rest of your lives. Look around this room. These walls shine because someone cared enough to clean them. Those chairs are spotless because someone stayed late to wipe them down. The comfort you've always enjoyed came from someone else's labor. Respect that, because one day you might find yourself in their shoes. The room went silent, so quiet that you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Some people lowered their eyes, unable to meet anyone's gaze. One woman began to cry softly into her hands. It was Rachel, the intern who had once eaten lunch with me. She whispered she never forgot anyone, did she? Mr. Daniels continued reading the last part of the letter. And finally, to my daughter Emily and my grandchildren, I leave everything else. I have my house, my savings, and my heart. You are my reason for waking up every day and working hard. I know you'll use what I've left you to do good things in this world. Be kind to others even when they don't deserve it, because kindness is what saves us in the end. With love always. Linda. When the lawyer finished, the room stayed silent for a long time. Emily was crying quietly, holding her daughter close. Sophie asked softly, "Why are they all so sad?" Mom, Emily whispered, "Because they just realized how special your grandma really was." After the reading, Mr. Daniels went through the details of the will. He explained that the trust fund Linda had created was large enough to provide bonuses for more than 20 years. The cleaning staff, some of whom had known her since they were young, burst into tears. One of them, an old man named Carlos, said, "I never thought someone would do something like this for us. God bless her soul." Then came a moment no one expected. The building manager, Mr. Peterson, stood up. He had been one of those who used to look at Linda with cold eyes years ago. He cleared his throat and said, "I remember her. She used to come in early, always smiling, always polite. I never really talked to her much because I thought she was just another cleaner. But today I realized she was a better person than most of us here. I'm ashamed it took her death for me to see that." Others nodded, some cried quietly, and some walked out, unable to face the guilt that came flooding in. They remembered their laughter, their careless words, the times they had walked past her without even saying hello. After the meeting, Emily went to the janitor's closet, the one her mother used to keep spotless. She opened the door, and inside she found a small box with her name on it. It had been left there intentionally. In the box were old photographs, letters from years ago, and a key. She sat down on the floor right there, surrounded by mops and buckets, and opened one of the letters. It read, "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then you found the place that held my life for 30 years. I spent more time here than anywhere else, and every inch of this closet tells a story. But the most important story is yours. You made every sacrifice worth it. You gave my life purpose. The key you're holding belongs to a small storage unit I rented years ago. It holds things that may not be worth much to others, but they're pieces of my journey. Go there when you're ready and you'll understand what it means to live with pride no matter what the world thinks." Emily wiped her tears and whispered, "I'll go, Mom, I promise." That evening she drove to the address written on the note. It was a quiet storage facility near the outskirts of town. The sunset painted the sky gold as she unlocked the small metal door. Inside was a neatly organized space filled with boxes labeled with years. Each one had items from her mother's life-old cleaning supplies uniforms, a few awards for Employee of the Year, and a photo album. When she opened the album, she found photos of the building over the years, the people who worked there, and even some of her as a little girl smiling in her mother's arms. There was also a letter tucked inside the cover. It said, "Never be ashamed of where you come from, Emily. The world will always try to define you by what you have or what you do. But true strength comes from how you treat people and how you rise above the pain. Be brave, be kind, and never forget that your mother loved you more than anything in this world." By the time Emily closed the album, the sun had dipped below the horizon. She sat there in the soft glow of the storage light, crying and smiling at the same time. Her mother had lived a life of quiet dignity and left behind a legacy that no money could ever match. A few days after the will was read, the whole building began to feel different. It was as if Linda's spirit still walked through the halls. People spoke to each other more kindly. The same workers who had once been invisible were now greeted with smiles and thank yous. The cleaning crew started getting compliments from the executives, and for the first time they felt seen. Carlos, the elderly janitor, who had cried at the reading, came to work the next morning wearing a small pin that read, "For Linda." He said, "She always believed in us, and now I want to make her proud." The younger cleaners followed his lead and taped a picture of Linda on the wall near their supply room. They decorated it with flowers and a handwritten sign that said, "You mattered more than you knew." Emily came to visit often. She walked the same floor as her mother had walked for decades. She talked to the staff, listened to their stories, and promised to keep the trust fund running smoothly. She didn't want her mother's legacy to be just a memory. She wanted it to be a movement, she said. Quietly, one day, my mother cleaned this building, but she also cleaned people's hearts without them realizing it. As weeks passed, the story of Linda's will spread across town. Local newspapers wrote about her, calling her the cleaner with a golden heart. One article said she taught the world that dignity doesn't come from what job you do, but how you do it. People began sharing her story online, and soon it touched thousands of hearts across the country. Emily received letters from people she had never met. Some wrote that they had been cleaners themselves, and Linda's story made them feel proud again. Others said they had learned to treat people better because of her message. Every letter felt like another light shining in the dark. One afternoon, Emily sat with Sophie on the porch of their small house. The sun was warm, the breeze soft. Sophie was coloring while Emily read one of the letters. It was from a woman in Ohio who said she had worked in a school cafeteria for 20 years. She wrote, "Your mother's story made me hold my head higher today. I realized that even if people don't see my worth, I still have it inside me. Thank you for sharing her with the world." Emily pressed the letter to her heart and whispered, "You're still helping people, Mom." A few months later, Emily decided to organize a community event in Linda's honor. She called it the Hands That Build. She invited people from all kinds of jobs: cleaners, cooks, drivers, nannies, caregivers, anyone who worked quietly behind the scenes. She wanted them to feel celebrated. She wanted the world to see them the way her mother always had. The day of the event was bright and full of life. Banners fluttered in the air, music played, children laughed. There was a table with pictures of Linda through the years, her uniform, her gloves, her kind smile captured in every frame. Emily stood on the small stage and spoke to the crowd. She said, "My mother was not famous, not rich, and not powerful by the world's standards, but she had something more valuable. She had a heart that never gave up. She believed in hard work and kindness. She used to tell me that life is not about how high you climb, but how many people you lift along the way." People clapped and wiped their tears. Some of them shared their own stories. A man stood up and said, "I used to work in an office with Linda. I never spoke to her much, but I remember one morning when my wife was in the hospital. I came in late and she noticed I was upset. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just placed a cup of coffee on my desk and said, 'Everything's going to be all right.' That small act got me through the hardest day of my life." Another woman said, "I was new here when Linda taught me how to use the buffer machine. She said, 'Don't rush, child. The floor will shine only when your heart's calm.' I never forgot that." After the speeches, people hugged, cried, and laughed together. It felt like Linda's soul was smiling down at them. The event ended with everyone holding candles. As the sun went down, the light from those candles reflected in every face, soft and warm. That night, Emily sat alone in her mother's old room. She opened the drawer and found another note tucked between folded towels. It said, "If you ever feel lost, remember this, Emily. You come from strong hands. You come from love. You come from a woman who never gave up even when life tried to break her, and one day you'll pass that strength on to others." Emily held the note close and whispered, "I will, Mom, I promise." A year passed, but Linda's story didn't fade. The trust fund continued to grow thanks to donations from people who had been touched by her legacy. Even a few big companies reached out, offering to create similar funds for their workers inspired by her story. Emily decided to take it further. She quit her old job and started a non-profit organization called the Linda Foundation. Its mission was to support low-income workers across the country, providing scholarships, healthcare aid, and recognition for their service. She used her mother's savings as the seed money, and soon more people joined the cause. When the first scholarship recipient graduated from college, she wrote Emily a letter saying, "I wouldn't have made it without the help your mother's foundation gave me. I promise to live my life with the same heart she had." Emily cried when she read that letter. She felt her mother beside her, not in body but in spirit, guiding her every step. She said, "Softly, you're still here, Mom. You never really left." One summer afternoon, she visited the cemetery where Linda rested. She brought fresh flowers and a small framed photo of the event where hundreds had celebrated her life. She placed it by the grave and said softly, "They mocked you once, but now they honor you. You changed hearts more than anyone I've ever known." The wind rustled through the trees gently as if whispering back, "I told you kindness always wins." Emily smiled and stayed there for a while, watching the sunset, thinking of all the years her mother spent working, cleaning, enduring, yet never complaining. She realized that her mother's life had been a quiet revolution. She had changed the world, not with power, but with humility. Later that night, Emily wrote in her journal, "The world saw a cleaner, I saw a hero, and now everyone else finally does too." As the years went on, the building that Linda had once cleaned became a place of remembrance. Every year on the anniversary of her passing, the company held a day of gratitude. They invited workers from all departments to share meals and stories together. No ranks, no uniforms, no divisions, just people respecting each other. Carlos grew older and eventually retired, but before he did, he said, "I worked beside an angel and I'll never forget her smile." Emily's daughter Sophie grew up hearing these stories. She would proudly tell her friends, "My grandma was a cleaner, but she made the world shine brighter than anyone else." And in that truth, Linda's spirit lived on, not just in the rooms she once cleaned, but in every person who learned to see dignity in every kind of work. 2 years after Linda's passing, Emily's life looked calm on the outside. The foundation was running smoothly. She was invited to speak at schools and community events, and people often called her the daughter of the brave cleaner who changed lives. But inside her heart she was struggling. She missed her mother more than ever. And sometimes at night, when the house grew still, she would whisper into the dark, "I hope I'm doing this right, Mom." One autumn morning, Emily received news that shook her world. The company that helped manage the trust fund made a financial error that threatened to drain a large portion of it. The mistake wasn't hers, but the weight of it fell on her shoulders. The media began calling her careless and unqualified to run a foundation, her inbox filled with angry messages and her nights filled with sleepless worry. She sat at the kitchen table staring at old photos of her mother and said quietly, "I tried to honor you, and now it's all falling apart." Her daughter Sophie, who was now 12, walked in and hugged her without saying a word. She simply said, "Grandma would tell you not to give up right now, Mom. She'd say the floor only shines when your heart's calm." Emily smiled through tears, remembering that line, and nodded, "You're right, sweetheart," she would. The next morning she drove to the same building her mother once cleaned. She wanted to feel close to her. She parked her car and walked inside. The scent of polish and lemon filled the air, the same smell that used to cling to her mother's clothes. She found Carlos sitting by the reception desk. Though retired, he often visited to keep in touch with the staff. He looked up and smiled. Emily, it's good to see you, child, but you look tired. She sat down beside him and told him everything, the loss, the stress, the guilt. He listened quietly and then said, you know, your mother had days when she wanted to quit too. She once told me, when you scrub the floor long enough, you start to see your own reflection. That's how life works, child. Keep cleaning, keep working, and soon you'll see yourself again. Those words gave Emily strength. She returned home and began to fight back. She met with lawyers, accountants, and donors. She refused to let the foundation collapse because it wasn't just about money. It was about everything her mother believed in. Days turned into weeks, and slowly hope began to return. Donors stepped forward to help rebuild the fund. When people learned what had happened, they offered support instead of judgment because they remembered Linda's story. They trusted her daughter just as they had trusted her. One night, after a long day, Emily walked into her mother's old room. She sat on the edge of the bed and spoke softly, as if Linda could hear her. You taught me that respect comes from how we carry ourselves, not what others think of us. I'm holding on to that, Mom, and I won't stop until your dream is safe again. The following months were hard but fruitful. The foundation recovered stronger than before. Emily started new programs helping women who worked in cleaning jobs gain access to education and health benefits. One of those women, named Marisol, told her, I was embarrassed to tell people what I do, but your mother's story changed that. Now I tell my kids I'm proud of the work I do because it keeps us going. Hearing that filled Emily with quiet pride. She knew then that her mother's legacy was not just about the money or the will. It was about restoring pride in those who had been unseen for too long. One spring afternoon, Emily received an invitation to speak at a large conference in Washington, D.C. It was about human dignity in the workplace. She was nervous, but she accepted because she knew her mother's message needed to be heard everywhere. When she stood on stage under bright lights, she felt her hands tremble slightly. She looked at the audience filled with business leaders and workers and said, I'm not here to talk about success. I'm here to talk about worse. My mother was a cleaner for 30 years. She cleaned offices just like this one. She was mocked for her job, but when she passed away, people realized she had left behind more than most of them ever would. She taught me that no work is small when done with love, and that the value of a life is measured by the kindness we leave behind. The hall was silent, except for a few sniffles. She ended by saying, we can build taller buildings and faster machines, but if we forget to see the people who keep them running, then we've lost our humanity. The crowd stood and applauded, her eyes filled with tears, not for herself, but for the woman who had taught her everything. After the conference, Emily stepped outside and stood under the evening sky. A breeze brushed her hair and she closed her eyes for a moment. She could almost hear her mother's voice whisper, you did good, my girl, you did good. That night she returned home and found Sophie waiting with a handmade card. It said, Grandma's light lives in us. Emily hugged her daughter tightly and whispered, yes, sweetheart, it always will. As years passed, Emily continued to grow stronger, wiser, kinder. She was invited to partner with organizations across the country, and everywhere she went, she carried her mother's story like a lantern in the dark. She often said, my mother was my first teacher. She taught me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply wipes the dust off a forgotten corner and keeps shining anyway. And in quiet moments when the world fell still, Emily would close her eyes and imagine Linda walking through some distant hallway, mop in hand, humming softly to herself, still making the world a little brighter. With every step, years passed like gentle pages, turning in a quiet book. Emily grew older, but she carried her mother's light inside her like a lantern that never dimmed. The foundation thrived far beyond what she had imagined. It became a movement that reached every corner of the country, offering scholarships to workers' children, building housing programs, and inspiring kindness wherever it went. People began calling it the cleaner's legacy, and even after all those years, the story of Linda, the woman who had once been mocked for her job, was still being told in classrooms, in churches, and in homes across America. It had become something bigger than one life. It had become a message. Emily sometimes sat alone on the porch, watching the sky change colors in the evening, just like her mother used to. She would close her eyes and feel the warm wind brush against her face and whisper softly, "I hope you can see all this, Mom. I hope you know that your love still moves mountains." Her daughter Sophie had grown into a bright young woman. She was in college now, studying social work, and every time someone asked her why she chose that path, she smiled and said, "Because of my grandma. She was the bravest person I never got to really know, but she changed everything for us." One evening, Sophie came home with an idea. She said, "Mom, what if we build something permanent, something that will always remind people of Grandma's story, something they can see and touch?" Emily looked at her daughter's shining eyes and felt her heart swell. She said, "What do you have in mind?" Sophie smiled and said, "A library, a place for people to come learn, rest, and feel respected no matter who they are." It took almost 2 years of hard work, fundraising, and planning, but the day finally came when the Linda Hope Library opened its doors. It was small but beautiful, with clean white walls, wide windows, and books donated by hundreds of people. Each shelf carried a small golden plate that read, "Every person has a story worth hearing." On the opening day, the mayor gave a speech saying, "This library stands as a tribute not just to one woman, but to every person who works quietly, making the world better, one task at a time." He paused, then added, "And may we all remember that respect must never depend on a job title, but on the humanity we share." Emily stood near the entrance, holding Sophie's hand. People hugged her and thanked her for keeping Linda's legacy alive. She smiled, but deep inside she felt something deeper than pride. It was peace. That night, after everyone left, Emily walked through the library alone. She ran her fingers along the smooth wooden tables and the rows of books. The air smelled of new pages, and she stopped near a small portrait of her mother. Hanging on the wall under a single soft light, her mother's face glowed in the frame, gentle and strong, just as she remembered. She whispered, "I hope you like it, Mom. I built this from your strength, from your lessons, from everything you gave me." She stood there quietly, and for a moment it felt like she wasn't alone. She could almost hear her mother's soft laugh in the air, and her voice saying, "I told you, my girl, kindness never fades." Tears filled Emily's eyes, but they weren't from sadness, they were from gratitude. She said softly, "You were right, Mom. It never fades, it just grows." A week later, Emily received a letter in the mail. It was written by a young woman named Grace, who had grown up in a poor neighborhood. She wrote, "I found your mother's story online, and it changed my life. I used to hide my job as a housekeeper because I thought people would judge me, but now I'm proud. I even started taking classes at night using one of the scholarships your foundation offers. Thank you for showing me that what I do matters." Emily held the letter to her heart, smiling through her tears. It was proof that her mother's light still reached new hearts every day. Time moved on. Emily grew older. Her hair began to gray, but her heart stayed young. She continued visiting the building. Her mother once cleaned at least once a year. She would walk through the hallways, greeting the staff, thanking them, and reminding them that they were part of something sacred. She often left a single white rose near the janitor's closet door where her mother's box had once been found. Carlos had passed away by then, but the new generation of workers carried on his quiet respect for Linda. They called her Saint of the Hallways, and every time they polished the floor, they whispered a quiet thank you under their breath. One winter evening, Emily sat by her window. As snow gently fell outside, Sophie came to sit beside her. They watched the flakes swirl in the soft light. Emily said softly, "You know, Sophie, life isn't about what people think of you. It's about how much love you give away before you go." Sophie nodded. "I know, Mom, Grandma taught us that." Emily smiled, her eyes shining. She looked out at the snowy world and said, "Maybe one day someone will remember me too, the way I remember her." Sophie hugged her and whispered, "They already will. Mom, you kept her story alive, and in doing so you became part of it." Years later, when Emily's time came, she left peacefully surrounded by her family. She had prepared a letter for Sophie, just like Linda once had it said. "My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, then my journey is done. But I am not gone. You carry me inside you just as I carried my mother inside me. Live with kindness even when the world forgets it. Be brave even when you're scared. And remember that no act of love is ever wasted. The smallest gestures can echo forever. Go visit the library sometimes and listen quietly. You'll hear the sound of lives being changed. And that is our family song. When Sophie read that letter, she cried softly, but she smiled too because she understood completely the light her grandmother lit had passed from one generation to another like a candle that would never go out. And so the story that began with a woman mocked for her job ended with a world forever changed by her grace. People still tell her story today. Sometimes they whisper it, sometimes they shout it, but they always say it with love because Linda taught them something simple and eternal, that dignity cannot be bought, that kindness never dies, and that sometimes the ones the world overlooks are the ones who leave behind the brightest light of all.